All right, your SEC Insider Hit this morning brought to you by the Cheeseburgers and Wings at Roosevelt's at Live Oaks Golf Club on a football Friday. Grab a couple of buddies, hit Roosevelt's. That's the restaurant. Roosevelt's at Live Oaks Golf Club. Wings, delicious cheeseburgers, cold beer. That's one word. And their Philly cheesesteak sandwich, all at Roosevelt's Live Oaks Golf Club. This is a football Friday on the Out of Bounds show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Do want to let our listeners know that the Saints lost their tight ends coach and assistant head coach to Sean Payton. His name's Dan Campbell. He's now the new head coach for the Detroit Lions. And I kid you not, in his press conference, he talked about how the Detroit Lions are going to be kneecap biters. You can't make this stuff up. Yeah. They're if they get knocked down on the way back up, they're going to bite people's kneecaps. That may be something that you're into. It may not. I just wanted to let you know that may give you what you need to order a Detroit Lions jersey. It could be Stafford, or you may just want to go throwback and grab Barry Sanders. Live in the Bank Plus studio, Out of Bounds, 105.9 The Zone. ESPN, we welcome in Steve Robertson, Hail State Insider, genespage.com. Steve, did you hear that we've got some kneecap biters in Detroit?
I did, and it's funny, it's like you see so many of these press conferences, and that one topped a lot of what we've seen recently. It was so disjointed and so bizarre. It was like I was watching a bad episode of The Walking Dead. And then this guy signed a 6-year contract, and it's like, wow. But best of luck to him. I mean, I think there's a reason the Lions hadn't been to the playoffs in forever and a day. So.
I would have loved to have been watching the Detroit Lions media relations guy as this was all unfolding, the whole kneecap biting and other things in the press conference. Steve.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody will put that on a T-shirt or a sweatshirt, a hoodie or something. They'll try to find a way to market that.
Kneecap biters. Oh, my goodness. It
might sell better in Green Bay. It might sell better in Green Bay than it does Detroit,
Right, because they're thanking Detroit for making that hire. Good point. That's a good point. All right, it's rare we do this. Before I get into football, and we may touch on a little baseball, but basketball is not quite trending well for Ben Howland and the Mississippi State basketball team. 2 tough losses to A&M and Ole Miss. I guess you could throw in Kentucky, but as of the last week, A&M and Ole Miss, neither team is that good. They both kind of did the same thing, Steve. They made it real ugly, kept the game a low-scoring game, and they dictated on the defensive end, and Mississippi State could never really adjust. What's going on with the basketball team in Starkville?
Well, it's a young team. And, we knew beginning of the year there's going to be some ebb and flow and some up and down with a young team. They're having to depend on some guys that have not played a lot of minutes in the Southeastern Conference, and there's not a lot of depth on this team. That's why you see Iverson Molinar and DJ Stewart playing about 37 minutes a night. And I think that's why they kind of wear down late in ball games. And all of a sudden, you've got teams out there cranking up that 1-3-1 and a full-court press. I think you've got some guys that are in their legs a little bit, and they've had difficulty closing out in games. But, it's easy to get emotional about these things. And certainly losing to Ole Miss motivates Mississippi State, no matter the sport. And that's the case in this rivalry, in any rivalry. When one team's having success, it motivates the other side. But I think you've got to look at the totality of the season once it's done, and then make decisions. I know it's easy for people to jump on message boards and social media and say, okay, this is it, this is enough, but I don't think that's the case. I don't think there's been any decisions made about any of that. And I really think, with all the things that are going on, barring a complete total collapse, I think you got to give him another year, with these younger guys, and kind of let these guys gel and kind of build from here, because they are at the end of a talent cycle. So it'll be interesting to see what John Cohen's thoughts are at the end of the year.
They lost 4 starters. Do I have that right? So Woodard, Perry, Nick Weatherspoon, Am I missing one from last year? I can't remember.
Well, DJ started a good bit last year.
Okay.
He was a part-time starter. But, yeah, I mean, I think when you go back and look at that, yeah, I mean, Iverson Molinar started a little bit, when Nick was suspended. But, yeah, I mean, it was and then you had several transfers, too. And that's an issue, too. I mean, it's like you have all these guys that transfer because their recruiting misses, and that just simply adds to your misery. It's like, yeah, you're into the talent cycle, and then the guys you recruited to replace those guys are gone, so it forces you to be a much younger team, and that's a concern too. I mean, it really is. You've got to have some continuity on the roster, and you've got to win on a recruiting trail. When that's your calling card, you can't have 4 or 5 guys leaving per year, transferring out of your program.
Yeah, that's kind of college hoops in a nutshell, all around the country. Not just what Ben's facing, but other programs. All right, let's go to football. Boy, that was quick. Steve Robertson, genespage.com, 247. Well, I didn't want to lose all of our listeners. 247 Sports. He joins us on the let's go with the Abita Amber guest line. So, Steve, with football, is there something brewing? What is the latest on this running back out of Louisiana?
Yeah, Catravian Hargrove. Yeah, there's some things brewing with him. Last weekend, really things kind of bubbled up with him, and spoke to him on the phone, and he was pretty much ready to commit. And said he just wanted to take a few days to kind of consider his options and be sure this is what he wanted to do and not make an emotional decision. But it appears Eric Mealy, the Mississippi State running backs coach, has been on him for a little while, and they've had one scholarship left for, best available on offense, and this is a 4-star running back. It's rated a 92 by 247 Sports, and, he's wanting to play in the SEC. He wants to play Power 5 football. He wants to stay in the South, and, he's still talking with Penn State and some others, but, he's a guy that banged his knee up a little bit earlier this year. I understand he's already had a surgical procedure to kind of clean some things up there. He's expected to make a full recovery. And I think this is a situation where if you're State and you don't have to have a running back and you see this guy as a luxury, you can take a chance on a guy like that that's got that kind of ability. And so he's supposed to announce on the 27th. That's his cousin's birthday. And then get ready to sign a national letter of intent. But as it stands today, we expect him to be a Bulldog.
Oh, man. All right. So he's available because of an injury late. Is that kind of the way I'm reading this, Steve?
Yeah, and that's the way I see it, too.
Okay.
I think if he had been 100% healthy, he probably signs with Florida State or somebody in December. I
Gotcha.
think that, because of the fact that there's some questions perhaps that you kind of wait in February and see what happens. And so, again, State's already got their running back for this class, and I think this is truly a best available situation. And so you go take him, and maybe you redshirt him, and you let him have the full time to recover, and then you might really have something here, in a year's time. But I think if you're State, you can afford to take that gamble.
All right. The player that I missed earlier was Tyson Carter. So it was Woodard, Perry, Carter, and Weatherspoon. So it was 4 starters that Ben Howland lost last year. So there, as Steve said, there may be a little wiggle room for forgiveness, and Howland may get one more year. They're going to get the brakes beat off of them this weekend by Bama, and then they'll have to whatever they do down the stretch as far as trying to recover. Steve Robertson, Boneyard Podcast, genespage.com, and he joins us on the Abita Andy Gator guest line. As of right now, Mike Leach will keep all 10 assistants. Can you remember when that has happened, regardless of coach in Starkville, or how long it's been, Steve?
It's interesting. I've had that discussion with a couple of friends lately. It's Mullins. We used to call him the Mullen Mafia. Like all Mullins guys on offense that have kind of followed him around forever. Like Scott Salich and those guys. I mean, on offense, they was pretty much set outside of the wide receiver position, pretty much until Billy Gonzalez got here. There was a little bit of ebb and flow, but I don't remember a time, even back to the Kroom years, where it was you bring everybody back. I mean, it's just continuity on staff has been kind of elusive at times for Mississippi State because at times Mississippi State wasn't fully committed to football, and you'd have guys leave for better pay and opportunities. And The thing that I was told from the very first day when Mike Leach and his offensive staff got here is that these guys believe in each other. Many of these guys are former Leach players, and they understand the offense and understand the expectations of the program, and that we would not have a lot of that, not have a lot of job hopping on offense. And then, of course, Arnett was mentioned, for every defensive coordinator blue blood job in the country this year. And, once we got through the LSU thing, it appeared they were going to survive it, and they have. And it's remarkable, and I think that really bodes well going into next year.
Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds show. Steve, you know how we talked about Dan Mullen getting a show cause for a bumper rule on a junior, and you have to, basically haul tail out of the room and immediately call your compliance officer, but you can't hang around, and you can't visit and take a picture or whatnot. I didn't realize, and you probably know this, I didn't realize Jimbo Fisher received a show cause on the same kid out of the state of Washington, this super-duper edge rusher. Did you know that?
I had heard that there had been an instance that Jimbo was involved in. I don't know that I knew there was a show cause. It's remarkable, too. It shows that somebody up there is protecting their territory. It's like you SEC schools might get loose and fast down there in the South, but you're not going to come up here and do something silly around us. And listen, I respect it. I mean, I really do. I mean, I don't know that I would want people to come in there breaking the rules and doing things improperly. And so I didn't know that Jimbo had the show cause, but I did hear that there was an incident that they were kind of concerned about. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not a big deal, but it's something that's remarkable too to think about that two blue blood type programs head coaches are on a show cause, and that'll impact their recruiting for this class over a bumper rule.
Yeah. So it got this is on theathletic.com within the last day or two. And Dan Mullen got a show cause, Jimbo Fisher got a show cause, and a Notre Dame assistant got a show cause, all on the same kid because of the junior bumper rule. Steve.
It's crazy. and that's the thing too, is like the show causes. And in Mullen's situation, he's got a prohibition on off-campus recruiting. And so, that carries over this year because there was no off-campus recruiting this past year. And so now, if I understand this thing correctly, Dan Mullen can't participate in in-home visits. And when you look at the schools they're recruiting against, what does that mean when Nick Saban can come sit on your mom's couch or, Kirby Smart can come put his feet under your mama's dining room table, and Dan Mullen has to explain why he can't. If you don't think that's significant, I think that it is.
Mm-hmm. And so what you're saying is Dan was penalized this past year, but because of COVID, it's going to roll over for 2021. Is that right?
Correct. That's correct. And Mississippi State has some sanctions, that are rolling over too because of the Tutorgate situation, like where you had you had to limit attendance, but you couldn't bring in recruits. You couldn't provide, tickets to recruits. Well, so that prohibition carries over another year. And then there was some off-campus things and some official visit things that, that were expected to be served last year that will carry over. And that's the case nationally. Any sanction that could not be fulfilled or satisfied during the COVID year rolls over a year.
What do you think is going to happen at Tennessee? You think they're going to target 3, 4, 5 guys, and if they don't get who they want, they fall back on Kevin Steele, who they hired as the DC within the last week?
I think that's a real possibility, but I tell you, I love this Danny White hire. I really do. And I think it makes it look like Tennessee actually had a plan. They put these things together. You don't go get Danny White just on a whim. It wasn't just something that happened overnight. And I think that last Friday, they had their briefing as they wrapped up their internal investigation. They get through the weekend. They could get Kevin Steele hired, and then they announced the press conference on Monday, which was a university holiday, which is incredible to think about these days. They go out there and they have all that together, and by the end of the week, you've got Danny White and AD already in place. I think that shows that somebody at Tennessee has been thinking, and it's not just the wild, wild west like some people want to suggest, but now it's a matter of who they're going to hire as a football coach. And, people say, well, who's available? Well, yeah, I guess he could always bring Heupel with him. That's always a possibility there. But it's going to be a rough couple of years at Tennessee. And so whoever takes that job has got to understand that this could potentially be a career killer. So It'll be interesting to see who they hire. I don't know there's any hot names right now, but if this Danny White thing is any indication, it sounds like Tennessee might pull a rabbit out of the hat.
Wow, can you imagine, Blake, if Danny White? I don't know why I didn't throw that out. I threw out some other, but if White brings Josh Heupel with, by the way, for our listeners, Josh Heupel was Mike Leach's first quarterback at Oklahoma, and he was committed to Utah State, and Leach throws in the tape, and boom, they get him on campus late in the game, and he goes to Oklahoma and wins the title, and the rest is history. He's done a good job at. So, boy, that'd be a huge win, Steve, for everything they've been through the last 12 years and then the last 3 weeks. If they could land a Danny White, Josh Heupel combo and them navigate through these NCAA and waters, don't you think that's a home run for Tennessee?
I think there's no question. And listen, it's going to get worse before it gets better. You got a lot of players in the portal, and maybe some of those guys come out. But, you know, that's a thing I think about too, and I need to read up on this. But, you know, let's say, for an example, let's say Eric Gray is in the portal, and he is supposedly a party of interest in this NCAA case. Well, if he stays there, he can be granted limited immunity. You know, but if he goes in the portal, there's not the same assurance. You know, and so I think ultimately some of these guys that may be fleeing sanctions themselves, possibly, you know, being wrapped up in this thing, I think they need to think this thing through, because I don't think it's quite as tidy as that. I don't think you can just get in the portal and say, okay, under rug swept. I think there's a lot of these guys that, you know, maybe facing a loss of eligibility, you know, and so there's going to be some restitution that has to be made, and it's probably best to do all that and remain in-house in Tennessee. But, you know, with some of these guys that are just not affected by that are not involved, that didn't take any benefits, they may decide, you know what, I'm going to get out of here. I'm just going to get out of here and reboot my career. I'm not going to sit here and have 3 or 4 losing seasons in a row and never go to a bowl game when I've got potentially the one-time transfer rule coming up. So there's going to be some guys that go in the portal that are serious about leaving. But some of those guys that are wrapped up in that NCAA investigation, it's going to be interesting to see how that's handled when it comes to immunity with them. If they really want to grant them, you know, limited immunity and let them tell the truth and not have any consequences for their actions.
Nothing like cash in a McDonald's bag. Yeah,
you know, I've heard them call it the McPruitt, and I think that's clever. But yeah, it's like, you know, you hear about people using red Nike bags to drop off iPhones and cash and that sort of stuff, and McDonald's just goes old school. I mean, Tennessee goes old school, and it's just a brown McDonald's bag. And I'd love to hear some of the stories from those kids about how the delivery was made on that. I mean, just, you know, well, what's the presentation there? I mean, it's just
right.
Like somebody just walks up and hands you a bag, or you go in your hotel room and there's a Big Mac on the table and there's some cash in the bag. I mean, how did they do it? Did the Hamburglar deliver this? I mean, there's so many questions about this.
So Mississippi State, Florida, A&M, looks like Notre Dame, all recently did NCAA negotiated solutions. So you kind of do it behind the scenes and over in another room, and it doesn't go through the press, and you don't drag it out. Are you just baffled and blown away that not all the schools try to do that, Steve?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of it is when you can agree on the facts and you have that negotiated resolution like State did with the Tutorgate thing. You know, that's best for everybody involved. And it's one of the things that's so funny to me. I read so many, you know, message boards, and no matter the school, no matter the situation, no matter how guilty you are, no matter the evidence, everybody's like, "Oh, just lawyer up and don't do anything." Well, that's in the court of law. Okay, it's not as simple as that. It's not like that you declare your First Amendment rights and start pleading the fifth and that sort of stuff. When you're a part of an organization like the NCAA, there's a phrase called duty to cooperate. You have a duty to cooperate. And if you don't cooperate, you no longer get to participate in NCAA. And so that's why you see these joint investigations. And like you look at the Tennessee thing, to their credit, they found most of this themselves. It was kind of an accident, but they still found it. It wasn't like the NCAA came calling and says, "Hey, we've got all these complaints about you guys paying players." You know, the reports that I have read and the people I have talked to have kind of confirmed that a lot of this originated in-house. And so I think that will mitigate some things. And I'm eager to see what the full scope of the allegations are. Because it sounds like there's impermissible benefits to recruits and to players after they get to campus with knowledge of the coaching staff. That's a difficult thing to kind of walk through without getting your feet dirty. So, but yeah, there's so many schools out there that think, well, we'll just kind of, soldier up here and make the NCAA prove it. They will. And, if you push back a little bit harder, your sanctions will probably be a little more difficult to deal with than you anticipate, just because of the fact that when you play with fire, you get burned. And I think Tennessee is probably doing the best they can do under a very difficult circumstance. But if the allegations against them are true, I think this is going to be a very, very long probation, and they'll probably lose several scholarships. But you're exactly right. There are a lot of people out there that say, hey, let's go do this, or let's make this as difficult as we can. When you have a chance to go sit down in a room and say, listen, we're going to throw ourselves on the mercy of the court. We agree on these facts. We agree these things happen. Here's our corrective action, or what's our sanctions, rather than having to go through a long, drawn-out process in the Committee on Infractions. That absolutely seems like the way to go.
We've got 1 minute with Steve Robertson. Blake?
Yeah, Steve, real quick, we mentioned this earlier about what's going on at LSU. Do you think the fact that LSU has all this black shadow over them off the field, both NCAA and even worse, is that affecting Orgeron's ability to hire? Is that why he had to get a no pedigree offensive coordinator, and he couldn't get somebody like Freeman or Arnett or anyone like that on the defensive side of the football?
I do think that is the case. I think there's a really good chance in a year's time that whole staff is gone, and I think that is something that the coaches are looking at. Is like, do I want to move my family 2 times in 14 months? Because that is a real possibility. And it's not just the NCAA stuff. As you mentioned, it's the Title IX stuff. And that stuff will absolutely get you, and it absolutely should. And so if anybody that's involved in that can be proven that they were attached to those allegations, they need to be fired and never work in college athletics ever again. And so I think that is a big problem for LSU. I think it makes it very difficult to hire people, because how can you honestly tell anybody this is who you're going to be working for next year? I mean, you don't even know if Scott Woodward, the AD, is going to be there next year. You don't even know that. He may take another job, or he may leave, or, he may get wrapped up in all this stuff too. And they may say, you know what, we're just going to clean the whole university out. And so, there's no confidence to know that there's going to be continuity on the staff there. So I think it's a major issue for LSU, and I don't think that any of this is over by any stretch of the imagination.
Real quick, 30 seconds or less. C.J. Johnson, French camp. Call it. Does he go to Northwestern, Navy, or Mississippi State?
Well, he's not going to Navy. If I had to call it a day, I think it's Mississippi State, but I give that about a 7 out of 10.
Okay.
See what happens next week.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. Have a good weekend.
See ya.
GenesPage.com. Boneyard Podcast, 247 Sports. Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds Show. And, we've got some news here. All right, evidently I was misquoted in the first hour, so we're going to get into that and some other things. The show is brought to you by USA Pawn. For all your tools, electronics, and firearms, check out the USA Pawn mega store. I-55 South, McDowell Road.